Hello everyone, it's David from Automotive Press. I have the all-new Mazda CX-90 here, but what I want to do today is to do this in a live stream style. This way I can tell you a lot more information about the CX-90, especially compared to my other favorite three-row SUV, which is a Toyota Grand Highlander, and then kind of give you an idea of how to choose or how to decide between this one and the Grand Highlander. As you know, previously I did a full review on the CX-90 and I declared this to be the best three-row SUV out there. But now that I've driven the Grand Highlander as well, which was just last week in the Platinum version, it's going to be really interesting to compare the two basically side by side. I don't have the Grand Highlander with me right now, but I just returned that car yesterday and I'm driving this right now, so it's a perfect comparison between the two. So let me go through all of the engineer's audit in terms of exterior audit, interior quality check, the driving character, the functionality, practicality, and I'm going to tell you one by one which one is better than the other one, and in some cases it might be a tie, and then you can then decide which car is the right car for you. Let's go. Welcome back. So now I have the CX-90 here, as I mentioned, and I'm going to be talking about this in full detail, but also reference back to the Grand Highlander, which I was driving just last week. So hopefully I can give you lots of details in terms of differences or similarities between this and the Grand Highlander, so that you can decide which one is the right one for you. First, let me do my engineer's audit of the Mazda CX-90 and see how the quality is in terms of manufacturing. This one is built in Japan at the Hofu plant near Hiroshima, where I have been a couple of times now, and I'm going to visit the factory again this fall in about a month and a half's time. Compared to Grand Highlander, which is built in the Princeton, Indiana factory in the US, but that is where the Lexus TX is also going to be built. So it is a Lexus certified factory, but it is located in the US. This is built in Japan. Now, is there a difference in terms of quality? Well, you can't always assume that everything built in Japan is better, but let me find out by actually measuring the gaps and also looking at the panel alignment. So this one here, the CX-90, has 3mm gap in the front here and 2.9mm here, and it's very consistent. Surprisingly, the Grand Highlander also had 3mm in the front, 3mm in the back, and also very flat and really aligned. So far the two are almost identical in terms of exterior quality. What about the between front fender and front door? It's also 3 and very, very consistent, super well aligned, and it's actually 2.9mm here between the front and rear door, and between rear door and rear fender, 3mm. So this is by far one of the best quality vehicle in terms of the panel gap. Now, just because the panel gaps are really good doesn't mean the entire quality is really well done as well. But typically there's a correlation between external panel quality and everything else to do with quality. In other words, if you get the exterior panels done right, then most likely everything else is also done quite well. Let me look at the back end here, and it's 3mm. So the Mazda CX-90 is just a little bit better than the Grand Highlander in terms of panel gaps and panel alignment. And if I look at the actual sheet metal, looking from a front to back, this is one of the best in the world. Nothing to do with Mazda or Toyota or price range or price tag, just in terms of pure manufacturing quality. And I should know this because I'm a former manufacturing engineer for a number of car companies. This level of alignment and the panel fit and finish is absolutely world class. I'm going to say that the Grand Highlander is very similar, pretty close, not too far off, but this one has a slightly better overall panel fit and finish. Just a little bit, I would say maybe 5% better, but pretty close. And for most of you, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the two. So I'm going to declare, in terms of external panel quality and panel alignment, the two are almost identical, with a slight edge or slight advantage for Mazda CX-90. Once again, maybe 5% better than Grand Highlander. But among all of the other three-row SUVs in the marketplace, both the Grand Highlander and the CX-90 at the very top, in the top 2 or 3%, and in fact better than many cars costing twice as much. So external panels, absolutely excellent. What about the paint job? And this is something that's always very difficult to measure and to evaluate, just because the Grand Highlander and the CX-90 is not side by side, and they also have different paint job. The Grand Highlander was a storm cloud blue, I think that's what they call it, and this one is a dark gray. So somewhat similar but a little bit different. Once again, this is one of the advantages of the Mazda plant in Japan, at the Hofu plant where I have been, because the quality is just absolutely first class, and you can tell the paint very consistent, really good amount of clear coat, little bit of orange peel, very similar to the Grand Highlander actually in terms of the quality. And you can see these lines of reflection that Mazda talks about. It reflects like this, come through here, and reflects over here as well. So they were really proud of designing a sheet metal and actual paint job in such a way that the reflection goes like this in the arc, in sort of like reflecting off a beautiful piece of artwork. And from that perspective, this is again perhaps one of the best in the world. I would say the overall paint quality is close to Grand Highlander, but a little bit better, not a whole lot, maybe once again 5% difference, maybe even less than that, 3 to 5% in terms of just the gloss is a little bit better on this one. So overall, in terms of external quality, I would say the Mazda CX-90 and Grand Highlander are both almost identical, but this one is slightly better. Okay, so now I'm inside the Mazda CX-90, and this is where things begin to change a little bit, at least in terms of design. But first, let's take a look at the quality of the interior of the CX-90, reference back to the Grand Highlander, and see if I can try to figure out which one might be better, or perhaps they're almost the same. So first, in terms of the interior material fit and finish, you can tell something that they've done at Mazda that maybe other manufacturers don't often do, and that is the texture of these plastic molded material. This is a soft material, by the way, but the texture of this material is in such a way that this whole thing looks like a real leather. This is obviously not real leather, but it's a natural texture, not glossy. It's not even semi-gloss, but it's matte. And the way they built this material wrapped around the dash in such a fashion that this whole thing looks like a real leather that's placed on top of the dash. Same thing over here. This is normally a hard plastic with other manufacturer, but this is actually soft plastic with just the right amount of grain. The grain is not too obvious like here, but not so light that it looks kind of fake. Again, it looks kind of real leather here, and it's very matte, which is what I like to do, and soft plastic. Both the material here and here, as well as here, and all of the chrome finishes, or semi-chrome I should say, fantastic level of quality. Only the best engineers will be able to design like this and create an interior fit and finish and design that makes it very high-end, but not all over the top. It doesn't look super over-designed, but it just looks right to me, more European flavor. And so the material fit and finish is good. If I do my normal punch test, nothing is out of the order. Again, this even here is a bit of a hard plastic, but with a little bit of a soft touch, mixed in with this carbon fiber style trim with aluminum fit look plastic piece and some stitching here. And on the higher end, Mazda CX-90, you get a beautiful, gorgeous stitching along here as well. But even on this model, which is an intermediate mid-level one, it looks really good. I'm glad that all the controls are also here for buttons for temperature, as well as all the AC controls. We didn't lose that because some manufacturers like to put all of that controls into the infotainment system. But a little bit more on that later on. Also here you have the aluminum look. This is not carbon fiber look, but a different kind of pattern. And I like that because you won't be able to put the fingerprint on it. It won't get scratched because thankfully they chose not to use a glossy black finish. So I appreciate that. Good engineers know a glossy black just isn't the right material for most of the interior of the automotive finishes. Good amount of leather on the steering, really good stitching along here. and just the perfect placement of buttons for ergonomic reasons. And also you get a very big and easy to see instrumentation. This is not fully digital, but I actually like it when it's kind of semi-digital. So all looking really good. I would give this interior fit and finish and the overall quality, again, solid A+, really well done. I wish more manufacturers spent the same amount of time and energy that Mazda has done to create an interior that's not just well designed, but also has the high quality look. Now, I would say though that the Grand Highlander interior is also about the same in terms of fit and finish, the choice of materials, the overall quality, because the Grand Highlander also felt really good in terms of the design and just the overall finish, and even ergonomics wise, they kept all the buttons and everything else. So I would say in the case of interior fit and finish and quality control, I'm going to call it a tie between Grand Highlander and Mazda CX-90. I don't think this is necessarily better than the other one, but in terms of functionality and design, there's some advantage for the Grand Highlander because we get a big 12.3 inches screen on the Grand Highlander that is all touch panel, and therefore a little bit easier to control than Mazda, because what Mazda wants us to do is try to use this center console. That way we don't keep our eyes away from the road. But you can also use touch panel, but only for certain things. And so for example, if you're going to Apple CarPlay, this turns into a touch panel and you can function as a touch. But otherwise, you can't use the touch panel on here. They lock it out. And that is to maximize the safety aspect of the car so that you're not trying to navigate like this while driving. But you know what? At the end of the day, it doesn't make sense to have part touch panel. You really want full touch panel. So if this was a little bit closer to me and it was fully touch, then it would be as good as the Toyota Grand Highlander. But because this is partly touch and a little bit awkward to navigate using my control here, I'm going to say that in terms of functionality of the interior, the Grand Highlander is a bit easier and a little bit better than the Mazda. But once again, in terms of quality, the two are definitely a tie. Both are really good, right up there with some of the best in the world. Not too many automakers can design interior and make it with the high quality that Mazda and Toyota can do. So these two definitely leading the edge in terms of interior design, interior quality. So I really like the interior of Mazda. The seats are comfortable, infinitely adjustable in terms of height and rake and so forth. It's got a pretty good side support. And I'll talk about the back space as well in a short second here. We'll walk into the second row and then also in the third row. And let's see if there's a difference between the CX-90 and the Grand Highlander. So now I've hopped into the second row seat of the Mazda CX-90. Very comfortable, good headroom, overall good shoulder room. I get sort of captain chair style design here, so I have my own armrest and so forth. I would say the legroom is okay. It's acceptable and more than enough for someone like myself who is not super tall. I do admit the Grand Highlander had a little bit more, not much more, but a little bit more legroom in the second row seat. But otherwise, extremely comfortable. I like the really big window here, very airy feel. And with the panorama roof open like this, it feels super airy. So extremely well designed. Once again, the quality is excellent. I can have the shade if I want to. But all this stitching, all the material, fit and finish, just absolutely first class. I always so impressed with the manufacturing quality of this Mazda. Yes, it is built in Japan by some of the most experienced people out there. And yes, that does show up in the quality, but it's more than just that. It's also the engineers behind the scene who designed the materials, who selected the materials, who have chosen how these parts fit in. That plays a big part of producing a car that feels like high quality. And I think Mazda have a very experienced engineers and experienced manufacturing people who have really worked together to create a very high-end three-row SUV, even though this one is not priced like a luxury vehicle because it is very reasonably priced. The quality of the interior is such that it looks like a high-end model. Let's hop into the third row and see how roomy it is. Okay, so now I'm in the third row seats right here. And actually the seats are quite comfortable, good hip room, and the cushions are pretty soft. And I guess I'm almost touching the top here, so that headroom is acceptable, but maybe not great for anyone taller than myself. I'm 5'8". The legroom is also pretty good. If this seat is moved forward, and that means sacrificing the legroom for the second row passengers here. But assuming that you don't have a really tall person sitting in this row seat, I'm actually reasonably comfortable. But definitely the Grand Highlander is roomier, and I get more shoulder room, a little bit more hip room, and just generally speaking, there's more space because I don't have this huge bump here in the Grand Highlander. That's a little bit further back because the Grand Highlander is a bigger vehicle. This is where the wheel wells are behind the scene here, and therefore this has to come up. And this actually makes a really nice place to put my arm here as an armrest, but it also take up a space in terms of width here. So what can I say? It's fine for short trips. Even for me, it's probably more suited for kids or people who don't need so much space. But compared to Grand Highlander, definitely smaller here. So if you want the maximum space, maximum practicality for all three rows, then the Grand Highlander is better than the CX-90 because also when the third row seat is up, the trunk space behind is bigger in the Grand Highlander than the CX-90. And that's just simply because it is a larger vehicle compared to Mazda CX-90. I think if you don't need to put someone in the third row all the time, then this is more than sufficient for most of us because I don't want a really big SUV for my personal taste, but for those people who want to maximize the space for everyone on board, including the third row, you'll definitely want to stick with the Grand Highlander in that case. What about in terms of powertrain? Well, this is where things get interesting because the old Mazda CX-90 is powered by a 3.3 liter inline six-cylinder engine, and it's one of the best engineered six-cylinder engines out there. And it does have turbocharged, so it's got plenty of power. This one is not the top of the line. It has 280 horsepower, which is more than sufficient. If you choose the high output flagship Mazda CX-90, then it has 340 horsepower, so plenty of power and plenty of torque as well. And of course, I love the six-cylinder engine. In the case of a Grand Highlander, you have the 2.4 liter turbocharged four-cylinder engine, and therefore it's a big shift for them because they went from V6 to 2.4. But more importantly, they don't have an option of a six-cylinder engine anymore. Now that by itself is not an issue in the sense that they still have a pretty good power and torque, but some people may just prefer the feel of a six-cylinder engine, which is a little bit more relaxed. It has a little bit more of a naturally aspirated feel, even though this is a turbocharged engine. Compared to 2.4 turbo in the Grand Highlander, it doesn't matter which model you pick, they all have a slightly different feel than the Mazda CX-90. Just in terms of a specification, they're pretty close. This one has 280 horsepower, as I mentioned, and the regular Grand Highlander with the 2.4 liter turbocharged engine has just a slightly less power than that. And the top of the line Mazda CX-90 has 340 horsepower, and then the Grand Highlander top of the line model, which is a hybrid max, has just a little bit less, I believe, 326 horsepower there. So it's very close to each other, but the feel is different on the road, and I'll talk about that once I'm on the road with this vehicle. But one more advantage for the Mazda CX-90, and that is we can get a plug-in hybrid with this one, which makes a naturally aspirated 2.5 with a plug-in hybrid. And I'll do a separate review on that one. Whereas on the Grand Highlander, we cannot get a plug-in hybrid. You'll have to buy the Lexus TX, which is very similar to Grand Highlander, but Lexus version of it. And if you buy that, you can get the plug-in hybrid. And in that case, they are mating together a 3.5 liter V6 engine with a hybrid system to give you a plug-in hybrid. So that one is going to be interesting in the sense that it has a V6 with a plug-in hybrid compared to Mazda CX-90. But just in terms of comparing the Grand Highlander to the Mazda CX-90 and not the Lexus TX, I'm definitely more biased toward enjoying the six-cylinder turbocharged engine compared to the 2.4 liter turbocharged four-cylinder engine in the Grand Highlander. Even though there's nothing wrong with that engine and it performs really well, I definitely prefer the feel of the six-cylinder engine. So I would say in that comparison of the powertrain, I would prefer the six-cylinder. But you may prefer the 2.4 turbo on the Grand Highlander because it does do a little bit better in terms of fuel efficiency. Okay, so now I'm driving the Mazda CX-90. Once again, this is the GT level, which is the intermediate version, not the top of the line one with 340 horsepower. This is an intermediate one with 280 horsepower, but this one still has a 3.3 liter inline six-cylinder engine with turbocharged engine. And also, I forgot to mention that it has a mild hybrid. So when I first just start off from a stop like this, the mechanicals of the hybrid system will take over, so that engine doesn't have to work so hard to keep the vehicle moving forward, and that will give us a slightly smoother start and quieter start as well. So it's an ideal setup of a mild hybrid, and that's what we have in the Mazda CX-90. In fact, all the CX-90 except for plug-in hybrid has the mild hybrid system, which isn't the case with the Grand Highlander. With that one, you have to choose if you want the normal gasoline engine or hybrid, or the high performance hybrid, which is called a hybrid max system. So a little bit different setup and system from the Mazda. But in terms of driving feel, which is the most important thing for me, the two is a little bit different. There's no question that the Grand Highlander is a bit more refined in terms of overall feel. And for those people who want maximum comfort and best ride, the Grand Highlander has a little bit of an edge over the CX-90. Not a huge amount, but definitely that one does feel a little bit more refined, more of a Lexus feel, which is something I talk about in the Grand Highlander review. But the CX-90 is still more fun to drive. There's no question that the Mazda engineers prioritize handling, steering feel, and a basic cornering ability with the CX-90 compared to any other competitor's three-row SUV, because this one really feels like a true sport utility vehicle, if you know what I mean, as opposed to most sport utility vehicle, which are nothing more than a glorified minivan in some cases, because they're just designed to move a lot of people in a large space. And in terms of comparing the Grand Highlander to the CX-90, that is exactly what's happening. The Grand Highlander prioritized for maximum comfort, maximum quietness, much like the way the Lexus feel, versus the CX-90, which is prioritizing handling, steering feel, and a more of a sporty character. So if you're asking me which one do I prefer, well, knowing that I really like 6-cylinder engine compared to 4-cylinder engine, and you guys know that I prefer a sportier feel, I'm going to have to say for driving character, I definitely prefer the CX-90 over Grand Highlander. Having said that, the Grand Highlander is more comfortable, a bit more refined, and the suspension calibration and suspension design is better in the Grand Highlander, because the CX-90 has a tendency to lose a bit of a composure over bumpy road, and therefore it can feel a little bit rough over bumpy surfaces. But this one is also very good. There's no question that it is smooth, very refined as well, just not quite as refined as a Grand Highlander. So just to summarize, in terms of driving feel, the CX-90 has a better overall performance feel because the steering has a better feedback. It's a bit heavier, feels more like a sporty SUV as opposed to just any other SUV. And the engine also performs a bit like a sports vehicle as opposed to a utility vehicle. Compare that to Grand Highlander, which is clearly a bit more focused on refinement and ride comfort, and therefore if your top priority is comfort and refinement and smoothness, then you're going to want to pick the Grand Highlander. Even though I would say in general the differences between the two in terms of driving character is not a huge amount, I think if you drive them back to back, you will notice the difference between the two. So I hope that was helpful in terms of driving character. As I explained throughout this video, there are many other differences between the two vehicles, and by going through all of the things I talked about, I think you will be able to decide which is the right vehicle for you. If you want maximum space, maximum practicality with a reputation of a long-term reliability that Toyota brings, you might want to buy the Grand Highlander. But if you are the type of person who enjoys driving, who wants to have a little bit more of a sporty feel when they're driving, and you don't mind that it's not quite as roomy as a Grand Highlander, and you also want the feel of a 6-cylinder engine versus turbocharged 4-cylinder engine, then you definitely want to pick CX-90. And also keep in mind that even though I couldn't tell a huge difference in terms of measuring the gap and looking at the paint quality and so forth, this one is built in Japan, designed by Japanese engineers, built at the Hofu plant near Hiroshima, compared to the Grand Highlander, which is built in the US in the Indiana plant. And maybe that matters to you in terms of your preference. I don't think there is really a measurable difference that I can tell between the two, but some people simply want to buy something from Japan because they might be a little bit biased toward a vehicle that's built over there. So that's something that you have to decide if that factor is important to you. So by analyzing all these factors I talked so far, hopefully you can figure out what's right for you. You'll have to also look at the spec sheet and look at the pricing, look at all the features and options, and that will also help you decide as well. But for now, I'm going to leave it with you to decide. If you can give me a thumbs up, make some comments, and if you haven't done so yet, would you also kindly subscribe, and that'll be truly helpful. But until next video, I'm signing off for now. Thank you so much.